Hello, welcome back to the MOOC program Disaster Management Preparedness Session 2, offered by School of Management, SNIT, Adur. In this session, we shall discuss terms like vulnerability, risk, disaster management, and disaster management cycle. In the last session, we discussed the term hazard in detail. Now you know that COVID-19 is a biological hazard. Can you tell me your vulnerability to COVID-19? You can assess it by yourself by knowing what vulnerability is. The physical and spatial characteristics, circumstances or both of a community, system or asset that makes it susceptible to the damaging effect of a hazard is known as vulnerability. In simple terms, vulnerability is the ease with which a person or a system is susceptible to hazardous events. You can assess the extent of vulnerability by measuring the factors of exposure and sensitivity of a person or system to hazards. This exercise of assessing vulnerability is known as vulnerability assessment. It may be understood that vulnerability, exposure, and hazard have multiplying effects. What are the factors that contribute to vulnerability apart from exposure and sensitivity? The drivers that determine vulnerability factors are physical factors, social factors, economic factors, and environmental factors. Examples of physical factors are poor building codes, inefficient land use planning, and ineffective cost zone management. Social factors that contribute to vulnerability are poverty, inequality, gender aspects, and disability. Economic factors are many, which include uninsured informal sectors and large-scale dependence on industry, business, and global network of supply chain. Environmental factors include poor environmental management, overconsumption of natural resources, and decline of risk-regulating ecosystem services. Vulnerability assessment that involves identification and analysis of driving factors is for finding answers to all these questions. Risk is a combination of probability of a hazardous event and its negative consequences. Risk is a forward-looking concept which is expressed as the likelihood of loss of life, injury, or destruction and damage from a disaster in a given period of time. We can quantify risk through risk assessment. It can be seen that risk factor R is product of H hazard and V vulnerability. There is another factor C in the expression. It indicates capacity for facing hazardous events. Lower the vulnerability, higher the capacity, reduces risk. Activities intending reduction of vulnerability and increase in capacity, thereby decreasing risk, is known as disaster risk reduction. Here you can see that the term hazard H remains same. Let us consider the biological hazard COVID-19. Ensuring social distancing and implementing total lockdown is to reduce vulnerability. Hand washing, sanitization, and use of mask are personal level capacity development. Arranging sufficient number of isolation wards, procuring medical implements including ventilators and other necessary items are institutional level capacity development. These activities like reducing vulnerability and increasing personal as well as institutional capacity, risk of COVID-19 can be reduced to greater extent. These activities are in general known as disaster risk reduction activities. Disasters are events that cause serious disruption of the functioning of a society, causing or threatening to cause widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses, which render the affected community unable to cope up with using its own resources. Disaster is a function of the risk process, a combination of hazard, conditions of vulnerability, and lack of capacity or measure to reduce the potential negative consequences of risk. You can now consider the biological disaster due to the pandemic COVID-19. You can search and find any number of examples for disasters. 2015 Nepal earthquake or the devastating Hurricane Katrina are to cite just two examples. Disaster management is a set of systematic and dynamic process by which the management taxonomy of administrative decisions, organizational mechanism, operational skills, and capacities are applied in order to lessen the impact of hazards. The entire spectrum of disaster management that consists of capacity building band on one side as prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and the building back band on the other side that consists of response, relief, recovery, and resilience is known as disaster management cycle. There has been a paradigm shift from the response-centric disaster management to the disaster risk reduction management. Dear learners, we are at the close of session 2. In this session, we discussed terms like vulnerability, risk, disasters, disaster management, and disaster management cycle. In addition to that, we have also considered HVRA, hazard, vulnerability, risk assessment. Here is an assignment for you. Assignment 2. Do HVRA of your community as far as COVID-19 is concerned. Send your response to the email ID given. Be prepared, be safe, and be happy. Thank you for watching. Till we meet in session 3.